Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime as Liverpool travel to the south coast to take on Southampton at St Mary's on Monday night. It's an 8 o'clock kickoff with a last team to play this weekend, so there's the possibility that a little bit of pressure will have been put on us before this game. As I'm recording this, Chelsea are just about to play Man City, so it'll be very interesting to see how that match plays out and exactly what bearing that will have on the fight at the top of the table. But it goes without saying that there is now very little room for manoeuvre for Liverpool at the top of the league. We sort of had a little bit of a period just around Christmas time, sort of either side of Christmas Day, where it felt like we might actually start pulling away at the top and put a little bit of distance between us and everyone else, and they'd all be scrapping to try and get up to second place and be the team that was closest to Liverpool. Whereas now we're very much back in the position where the lead at the top of the table could be changing several times every weekend. And for now, at least, Liverpool are keeping hold of it because of the amount of points we have and also a superior goal difference to some of our rivals. But as I said, the room for manoeuvre is gone now. We can't afford to really drop points. Looking back on those performances against West Brom and against Newcastle, the performances were incredibly disappointing, but you could at least reconcile the result with the fact that we'd managed to still get a point out of it. We hadn't dropped all 3 points and were therefore maintaining our position at the top of the table. But now, if we drop any more points, what with Man United being level on points with us now, things could start to get a little bit ugly. And the last thing we want is to be going into that game against Man U in a couple of weeks' time with them either being level on points with us or further ahead at the top of the table. We want to be the ones that are looking to put breathing room between us and our rivals rather than being the ones that are playing catch-up in big games like that. So this is, within that context, a very, very important game for Liverpool. And of course, having come off the back of those two disappointing games against West Brom and Newcastle, it's a chance to get ourselves back on track, really, to put in a performance that shows that those two games were just a blip. Because like I said, the results weren't great, but the performances weren't great either. And if there's one, I would say, glimmer of hope, because that makes it sound like there isn't much hope going around at the moment. I think with Liverpool still at the top of the table, of course, we have every right to be optimistic, but there have been some setbacks. And one thing that I think will give us optimism going into this game is the fact that Southampton are unlikely to play the same way as West Brom and Newcastle. While Newcastle weren't quite as negative as West Brom were against us, both teams did look to use a low block. They'd recognised that under the current circumstances with Liverpool's depleted squad, Liverpool's tired squad as well because of just how many fixtures those players have had to, push themselves through, it does become more difficult to break down a well-organised defence because you don't have the energy to go hell for leather for the full 90 minutes. And one thing that did certainly benefit Liverpool in terms of how over the last few years we've kind of overcome the low block problem that was an issue in the early stages of the Jurgen Klopp era, I think, is fitness. I think it's the fact that the players are all able to play full throttle for 90 minutes, and as a result, you get to that last 10, even 5 minutes of a game, and even if it is level and the opposition has done so well to stop you breaking them down because you've still got so much left in the tank, it does become inevitable because generally, almost invariably in fact, the opposition defence runs out of energy because you can't maintain a low block forever, and Liverpool finally force their way through. But that's more difficult this season when what tends to happen, and it's not just us, it's been happening in matches all over the league over the last month or so at least, is games tend to end on about 70 minutes. You see, if both teams have scored and it's 1-1 or even if it's just 0-0 or 2-2 or anything like that, whenever the scores seem to be level and the clock starts running down and there's 15 or 20 or even 25 minutes to go, both teams just kind of look at each other and seem to shake hands on that moment and say, we just haven't got it in us to go for the win. And the last thing we want to do is bust a gut trying to get all 3 points and end up leaving ourselves exposed at the back and therefore conceding a goal and coming away with absolutely nothing. And that's not to say that Liverpool have been guilty of the same thing, because you'd like to think that we never really accept a point as an acceptable result, especially not against lower league teams like Newcastle or West Brom. But when that kind of dynamic starts seeping into every game, it becomes difficult for us to try and break the cycle because, like I said, the other teams are doing it. West Brom are looking at a point and saying, we'll absolutely take that. Newcastle are kind of doing the same, and you almost get sucked into following that pattern because, like I said, when the energy's not there, it becomes more difficult to control a game as well. It becomes more difficult to exert your influence as a team and manage it as you'd want it to be, and sometimes you do just end up going with the flow. But as I said, Thankfully, moving back onto the match this weekend, after that brief interlude at the start, I don't think Southampton are going to have that kind of attitude. They are a different prospect to West Brom and Newcastle. They're further up the table. They like to go at opposition teams a bit more. And to be honest, low blocking doesn't really work for them. It's not something that they do very often. And you can argue that maybe because it's Liverpool and because that low block has worked against us over the last few games, that they might change their tactics and say, actually, we need to be pragmatic here and adapt our style of play to get a result. But I don't think that'll be the case, because they've actually found that pressing teams and trying to play on the front foot and take the game to the opposition has worked for them against big teams. Looking back to last season as well, you think they managed to beat Manchester City during the period of games after the restart with an impressive 1-0 win against them at St Mary's. This season it hasn't quite worked out for them, and that will be maybe because of reasons that I'm going to come on to a little bit later on in the video, but it still remains their best form of attack. So I think this game will be different. I think it'll be more even, and that doesn't mean it's going to be easier. That doesn't mean Liverpool are any more likely to get 3 points out of it. But if you're worried about watching a drab, boring stalemate where it's all played in one half and it's just Liverpool passing it around the back, trying desperately and without any kind of success to get past the low defence, I wouldn't worry about that, because I don't think that's going to be the case. I think this will be much more of a contest, and therefore, regardless of the result, it should at least be a little bit more entertaining to watch. So team news going into the game. Once again, the club have been a bit weird about how they've done press conferences. They did a very small interview with Jurgen Klopp in his post-match press conference after the Newcastle game, and that's kind of doubled up as the pre-match one for this game. So again, it's a bit difficult to draw too much team news, because any updates we did have were a few days ago, and with the way things are going at the moment, stuff changes every single 48 hours pretty much. Players get injured in training, players come back, and then it's revealed that they're not quite ready yet, etc, etc, etc. But what we do know is that Joel Matip, who we hadn't had any updates on before the Newcastle game, apart from the fact that he obviously wasn't going to be available for that match, was given a prognosis of 3 weeks for his injury, which is very good news if you're a glass half full person, because there was every chance, knowing Joel Matip, that it could have been, it could have been months that he could have been out. And it does mean that he'll miss this game. It does also mean he might miss the Manchester United game in a couple of weeks' time, although fingers crossed something works out there that means that he comes back quicker than expected. Jurgen Klopp's brought in one of his old Dortmund colleagues as a recovery specialist, and it almost feels like he was brought in, that appointment was kind of tailor-made to fix Joel Matip. So hopefully, he recovers a little bit quicker than possible, and maybe that appointment of a new recovery specialist will make a difference. But in the meantime, he's not going to be available for this game. Interestingly as well, some of you may have seen this, Liverpool recalled the young defender Morgan Boys from his loan spell at Fleetwood Town. The guy's a centre-back, young defender, like I said. So it's possible that maybe he's being brought in on a sort of emergency basis. Maybe it's similar to the Nat Phillips thing last season, where we brought him back just for the FA Cup game and then sent him straight back out. We have, of course, got a game against Aston Villa in the third round of the FA Cup on Friday night, although, to be honest, I don't think that'll be having any influence on Jurgen Klopp's team selection for this game. I think he puts all his eggs in the Premier League basket, and whatever team he can possibly put out against Aston Villa in the FA Cup, that's what goes out. And maybe that's what Morgan Boys has been brought in for. He's only had 2 appearances for the first team so far, and that was the 5-0 game against Aston Villa in the Cup last season, where the first team was away in Qatar, and then he makes a substitute appearance in stoppage time of that game against Shrewsbury, where the first team were away on their winter break. So he doesn't really have any experience really in the first team, although then again, you could have said the same for Reece Williams, you could have said the same for Nat Phillips. Liverpool have been had to play a little bit fast and loose with how quickly we introduce players into the squad. So hopefully we do see a little bit of him. I think it'd be a bit weird if we brought him back from a loan spell that could have been beneficial to him and then just not use him at all. Although in an ideal world, Liverpool do not have to call on unknown young centre-backs. So like I said, I think he may play a role in the game against Aston Villa, but I certainly doubt that he would be thrown into this game against Southampton unless he has been, tearing it up and at Fleetwood and he's been the Maldini of League One. But you do feel like we may have heard about that if that was the case. So as for how I think Liverpool are actually going to to line up for this game then, I think it's almost definitely going to be Alisson Becker in goal. In front of him, I think Fabinho definitely keeps his place at centre-half. And then alongside him, I think this time we go for Reece Williams over Nat Phillips. This is something that I did mention in the pre-match video for the game against Newcastle. I said that Nat Phillips was more likely to start that game because of his aerial presence, you know, his physical presence as well, his ability to win headers from set pieces, which I thought was definitely going to be used by Newcastle as a tool to try and get goals out of the game. Whereas Southampton are, like I said, very much a different prospect, and they try and create chances through pressing. They're quite similar to Liverpool in many ways, and I think on the balance of it, Reece Williams is probably much more suited to playing against that kind of team than Nat Phillips is. We've seen that Williams is very, very comfortable on the ball. He's reasonably press resistant as well. His fellow teammates seem to trust him with the ball as well, which is good. I think the way I'd liken it is maybe you go for Adrian and Kelleher. You know, Adrian does still have his positive qualities, despite all the negative ones that I'm sure we know so much about after his last few appearances for Liverpool. But one thing he doesn't have is the ability to play with the ball. He doesn't play out from the back. He doesn't look comfortable in possession with the ball at his feet or anything like that, whereas Kelleher is very much the opposite. Even though he's a young player like Adrian, he's still not as good as Alisson Becker, the first choice goalkeeper. But as a backup, if you're looking for a goal who can play with his feet, you'd go with Kelleher. And likewise with the centre-halves, Nat Phillips has his positive qualities. Like I said, he's good in the air, but he is not comfortable with the ball at his feet. And what tends to happen is if he gets put under any pressure, he is just either going to make a mistake, which you don't want to happen, or the best case scenario is he kind of just hoofs it clear and launches it out of play. And I think that did impact Liverpool a little bit against Newcastle. You know, you can argue that it should be the attackers who are doing the job and creating chances and scoring goals, but everyone is responsible for everything that happens on the pitch. The defenders are responsible for whether or not Liverpool score goals, in the same way that the attackers are also still responsible for whether or not we let any in at the other end. So with that in mind, you do need centre-halves in our system, especially when they're playing high up the pitch, who can pass the ball around and, like I said, who are press-resistant as well, because they're often put in positions where if they do lose the ball, it can potentially be catastrophic. So I think under those circumstances, knowing how Newcastle, Southampton are going to play, I think we have to go with Reece Williams as the centre-half. And then either side of them, I think once again we are going to have to push Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold through brick walls. I'm sure both of them will be getting rests in the FA Cup, but in the meantime we've got to ask for yet another 90 minutes from them in this game. In front of them in the midfield, I think it's Henderson at the base, Gini Wijnaldum one side of him, and then I think we have to, you know, bash the button, bring out the nuclear option and throw THIAGO in from the start, because as we saw against Newcastle, when he came on the pitch, it was a different story. And of course we don't get a goal, it doesn't completely change the game, but the mood of the way we were playing definitely changed. I think that players weren't just passing side to side aimlessly and sort of giving it to other people in the hope that they would break the opposition down. You had THIAGO picking out those difficult, high-risk forward balls, going direct, looking to create chances within the next couple of passes, whereas I felt very much like the rest of the midfielders were just keeping things ticking over. And sometimes that's fine. That one of the things that our midfield does so well, especially in big games, is just keep everything ticking over and let everyone else do the work. But if you're struggling to break down a defence, then they've got to get involved creatively as well. And, you know, Henderson, Gini Wijnaldum, Curtis Jones, all these players are good at it. But THIAGO is streets ahead of them, and to be fair, streets ahead of anyone else in the world, I think, at what he does. He is a brilliant passer of the ball. He's a great all-round midfielder as well, so I have no worries about him dealing with the Southampton press. It will definitely be a hectic midfield, both sets of players even chasing the ball down and not giving each other much time. And I entirely back THIAGO to deal with that. I know you can argue that he doesn't necessarily have the sharpness because of the lack of games, but when someone has his level of skill, you can even drop maybe 5% or so and still be one of the best players on the pitch, because the bloke is just that good. And I think, like I said, given the way we played against Newcastle before he came on versus when he entered the fray, it's very clear there that Liverpool are a more threatening outfit with THIAGO on the pitch, and that is something that we are going to need against Southampton. So I think he definitely has to start this game. He's had the time now. He's been in the squad. He had 20 minutes against Newcastle. He's had more training sessions since then, and I think he's shown more than enough in what little we as fans have seen of him to be fairly reassured that he is good enough to start in this match. And then ahead of them, I think we go with the usual front three, and I say that with a bit more apprehension than usual because it hasn't been working out over the last few games. You know, I think Firmino has been performing well to his credit. Out of the three of them, he has been having the best matches recently. He's got his mojo back, but the difference between Firmino and maybe Salah and Mane is when Salah plays well, he scores. When Mane plays well, he scores. When Firmino plays well, other people score, and the issue is when Mane and Salah aren't quite firing and they've lost their shooting boots essentially, then a lot of Firmino's work goes to waste essentially. So there is something that maybe Liverpool need to look at there. Obviously it feels harsh on Minamino after what was a very, very good and effective performance against Crystal Palace. Given that we've struggled going forward since then, he hasn't had a sniff within the team. I think it would be entirely fair to let Minamino have a bit of a chance. But like I said, when players like Mane and Salah are there and are available, you just know that as soon as they start hitting the ground and as soon as they do find their shooting boots, they are just absolutely deadly and streets ahead of anyone else you could possibly consider for those positions. So I think from the start, you go with Firmino, Salah and Mane as your front three. But what I would like to see, and this has been a criticism levelled against Jurgen Klopp time and time again, and it's certainly resurfaced over the last few games as well, is if it isn't going well, I think we should have substitutions early, because there's no point bringing people like Minamino or Oxlade-Chamberlain on with 10 or 15 minutes to go. That is not enough time for them to influence the game. With THIAGO, maybe give him 20 minutes against Newcastle. He can influence the match, A, because he's from such a crucial area of the pitch. He's in the very middle of the park, so everything's going to go through him. But B, because he's absolutely sublime. He is world class at the end of the day. Players like Minamino or Oxlade-Chamberlain or Xherdan Shaqiri as well, who hasn't had a sniff over the last few games despite the struggles we've had going forward, need a bit more time to find their way in the match, have a few touches, get into the rhythm of things, and then they can have an influence on the result and hopefully get us some goals. So if things aren't going well, then by all means, Jurgen Klopp should be swinging that axe and taking Mane or Firmino or Salah off, or anyone in the midfield as well. No one is exempt from this, and making changes to try and win the game. I'm not sure he will do that because it doesn't seem to be in his nature, but hopefully what's happened over the last couple of games will kick him back into gear a little bit and make him realise that when things aren't going your way, you have to make changes to amend for it. So taking just a quick look at Southampton then, last time out they drew 0-0 with West Ham at St Mary's in what was not necessarily a drab game. There were still chances, but it never felt like either team had quite enough to get the result over the line and force the goal that would have secured all 3 points. And if that sounds familiar, it's probably because that's a very similar template to Liverpool's last couple of games. But it does look like after a very promising start to the season where they were way up in the table, they were in the conversation for not just the top four, but the early conversation for who was going to be the league leader. I don't think anyone ever really seriously considered them for the title because, as we've now noticed, they don't quite have the squad depth to really sustain that kind of challenge. And that's been evident over the last couple of games with the way that they've just dropped off a little bit. And like I said, that pressing style is so important to the way they play. And we as Liverpool fans know when players start to run out of gas, it becomes very difficult to sustain that. And you do start looking a little bit drab and out of ideas because your style relies on you playing at 100%. And if you're at 90%, it just doesn't work. It's not like it's 90% as effective. It just completely falls apart because you cannot play to that level of intensity that is required to force chances and force goals as a result. And the issue with Southampton is, while Liverpool, although of course injuries have kind of levelled this out a little bit, have got a squad that they can rotate and it's full of players that understand that identity. If you go down even as far as the academy, it's now full of players that know how to play Jurgen Klopp's style of football because the identity now runs all the way through the club. Southampton haven't got that luxury. They've got a smaller squad. Ralph Hasenhüttl hasn't quite been there as long as well, so they maybe can't look to their academy for options in the same way that Liverpool can. And when they look to their new signings as well, those new signings are also still learning the system. It does become a little bit more different to sustain the same style of play all the way through the season, especially through this very difficult period where the fixtures are coming so quickly and players are starting to fatigue. However, one thing that is interesting about them is that they're very much a multi-threat team. It's not like when you look back at the game against Newcastle, for example, where Callum Wilson was very much the chief threat for them, or you go back to the game against Palace and Zaha was the player to watch out for. You look at Southampton, and of course, Ings is the one that you worry about the most because he is the goal scorer, and if you give him chances, he's generally going to score. But you can't just worry about stopping Ings because Shea Adams has found form as well. He's really starting to become a key part to how Southampton play, and he's adding goals to his game at last. Theo Walcott has been a bit of a revelation since he arrived there. I think I wouldn't say he's found his level because that sounds a bit derogatory to say that he's just not good enough for Arsenal. But it feels like with the pressure off that is there when you're at a big club, when you play for someone like Arsenal, if you go through on one-on-one with the goalkeeper, you're expected to score. At Southampton, you can have a few of those chances before you eventually find the net because no one's expecting you to be clinical and deadly and have a perfect end product 100% of the time. So I feel like he's found a little bit more freedom there and he's playing with it as well. He's playing in a much more threatening style. He's been given the license to not just be a goal threat, but he can get assists, he can get wide, he can hug the touchline, or he can cut inside and get into the box. And he has become a real threat for Southampton. Stuart Armstrong as well, coming back, has made a difference for them. He is a crucial player now. Again, one of those players that maybe wasn't as much of a threat last year, but has now had time to get into the groove of things, to learn the system a little bit. And they are now a bit more of a well-oiled machine. And of course, Ings coming back from injury. He came back against West Ham even. Unfortunately, didn't get his goal. He did just put one in the back of the net and it was ruled out for offside. But that's now given him kind of... it's got him up to speed, essentially, in the same way that Thiago's appearance against Newcastle means that he's now, hopefully, fingers crossed and touching wood and all that, he's now sharp enough to actually play a game from the start and be very influential. The same does, I think, go for Danny Ings. And then also having Ralph Hasenhüttl back, he did have to sit out the game against West Ham due to a positive COVID test in his household or something like that meant that he had to manage from home and do it all over Zoom. And he said that didn't work for him at all. And that's maybe one of the reasons that they struggled a little bit to break down West Ham. And of course, once things don't go their way early on, it becomes difficult to change things from the dugout when you're not in the dugout, you're on your sofa at home doing the whole thing over Zoom. So that'll probably give them a boost as well, him coming back. And like I said, they've been high flying this season. They maybe haven't got the results they would have wanted against the big teams, looking back to a 1-0 loss against Manchester City earlier on in the season. They got absolutely tonked. I think it was 5-2 by Spurs, and that did put a little bit of a dent in their ambitions to reach the very top of the Premier League table. But after a difficult run of results, I think they're winless in 4 now. This represents a huge opportunity for them to try and get themselves back on track. And of course, they will have had a little bit of a break as well, like we've had. It's not a really short turnaround between games, and that, pardon me, might just give them that little bit of extra energy that they need to get back to their best and get the result over the line. So as I said at the top of the video, I think it's going to be a contest. I think it will be a difficult game. It will be interesting to see how long it remains a contest for, because as I said, when games are level with not much time to go, teams do shake hands in the centre circle and just say, you know what, neither of us are that bothered about getting the point. With the little bit of the rest and the fact that it's going to be a very high tempo game, I'm not entirely sure how to call whether this could go all the way to the wire or whether it will start to peter out. It kind of depends how the game starts as well, and whether both teams just go hammer and tongs at each other or sit off a little bit to try and suss out how the opposition's going to play. But like I said, I think it will be an entertaining match, and regardless of the result, I think that is what we as Liverpool fans all need after 2 very dire games against lower league opposition. So I still think Liverpool are going to get the win, because I am always an optimist, and I think at the end of the day we should have just a little bit too much quality for Southampton, and with Thiago hopefully back in the side, I think that could end up making all the difference as well. And who knows, that could make all the difference between now and the end of the season as well. So that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, as always, you know what to do. Hit the like button down there, hit that subscribe button there if you are new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back on Monday evening after we've hopefully beaten Southampton. Until then, bye for now.